Hello, everybody in podcast land. I'm Dr. Ted Thatchencary, and this is MD Roundtable, a podcast about collaborating and learning from other healthcare professionals from all over the globe. We are all so much more connected due to technology. We have so much to learn from each other. Thanks for joining us today on MD Roundtable. Today's guest is Dr. Sylvia Owusu-Ansah, who is Associate Professor of Pediatrics and Emergency Medicine at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. She is also the EMS Medical Director and Medical Advisor for the Emmy winning series called The Pitt on HBO Max. Welcome to MD Roundtable, Dr. Ansah.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Great, my pleasure. Sylvia, I always like to start with your journey and how it all started for our listeners, if you don't mind. Where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I grew up all over the place. I was actually born in Boston and I'm a proud Bostonian. I was born at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Waltham, which is no longer, because as you can imagine, with the healthcare conglomerates that we see throughout the country, things are changing. But I am a proud Bostonian. I soon moved to Lexington, Kentucky. My parents got divorced and then moved to Concord, New Hampshire, to live free or die state, and had some interesting interactions there as an elementary school kid. And then, interestingly enough, my mom remarried, and my stepfather got a job with the WHO, not the band, but the World Health Organization in Southern Africa, in the newly minted country of Namibia, Southwest Africa, to head up HIV/AIDS education in the 90s. And so, for those who are as old as me, the HIV/AIDS pandemic epidemic was a huge scare, similar to what we dealt with only about 5 years ago with COVID. And so, I actually witnessed early post apartheid/apartheid firsthand as a high school student at an international school in Namibia, Southwest Africa, and got to see Nelson Mandela become the first Black head of state in the early 90s. We're actually in Cape Town in the streets celebrating with the rest of South Africans when that happened. I came back home to finish up school back in Boston in a small private school, and then continued on my journey to become a physician. And so went on to the University of Rochester in upstate New York for undergraduate, and then went to the University of Chicago Pritzker School of Medicine for medicine, and then did a lot of my post-medicine training in the DC area. So did my pediatric residency at Children's National in Washington, DC, and did my postgraduate fellowships at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine for Peds, Emergency Medicine, and EMS. And I also got my Master's of Public Health there as well.
This episode is brought to you by Butterfly Network, creators of the Butterfly iQ3, a next generation handheld ultrasound built for how clinicians actually work. If you've been watching The Pitt on HBO Max, you may have spotted the iQ3 in action, used by clinicians tackling tough cases at the bedside. It's not just Hollywood magic, the iQ3 is transforming real-world practice too. It's fast, precise, and powered by digital workflows designed for emergency medicine, critical care, and bedside protocols like eFast or Rush. Plus, AI tools like the Auto Beelines counter instantly quantify beelines to help gauge pulmonary disease severity in seconds. Now, with the latest cardiac output calculation tool, you can quickly evaluate fluid responsiveness and gain hemodynamic insights right at the point of care. See why the Butterfly iQ3 is setting a new standard in POCUS imaging. Visit butterflynetwork.com and use promo code MDRoundtable25 on the Butterfly store before December 15th to get a complimentary Softcase Mini with your purchase of a Butterfly iQ3. Butterfly iQ3, as seen on the Pitt and trusted by real-life clinicians. Wow, that's amazing. Sounds like a very interesting experience and upbringing that you had. Not many people can say that they had a chance to see Mandela, live. So that's amazing. What an experience.
Yeah, I mean, look, hindsight is 2020, right? And so I was like, early mid teenager at the time, and I didn't realize the significance. I don't think until about now when I rehash the story, retell the
Right.
story, my story of what an amazing experience that was, or an amazing historical experience to witness. So I'm grateful
Yeah.
to it now.
Yeah, and I understand you have ties to Ghana as well, right?
Yes, so I'm the daughter of 2 Ghanaians. Both of my parents come from Ghana, West Africa, particularly from the central region, the Ashanti region, from Kumasi and just right outside of Kumasi. And so, very, very proud of that West African heritage. My parents came here in the mid to early 70s. And as they say, the typical immigrant story, with the clothes on their back and the shoes on their feet, looking for
Hmm.
a new opportunity, not only for themselves, but for, potential of a growing family. And that's what my parents did.
That's fantastic, Sylvia. Yeah, I'm very familiar with the eastern region of Ghana, the Kwahu area.
Hmm. Hmm.
Been there many times. Beautiful place. So that's great. And who was your biggest influence in as a child on becoming a doctor?
Oh, wow. It's kind of hard to say now that you're asking the question. I know I looked up to my stepfather a lot. He wasn't a medical doctor, but he had a PhD and he did a lot in public health. And so a lot of the work that I do in the public health realm, I definitely credit to him. I just think I liked the aspect of helping people in the way of healing people. I always knew I wanted to help people. And I actually knew since the age of 7 that I wanted to be a doctor. I actually drew a picture of myself, not quite a stick figure, a
Mhm.
little bit more impressive than a stick figure, but had the rectangular building with a cross on it at age 7. And kind of didn't really shift away from that until college, where I really had to wrestle with, is this the pathway for me? And I'm a person of faith, so I took some time to pray and fast about it. And then once that was solidified, I knew for sure. But I think as early as 7, I was thinking about being a doctor. I think there's so many various folks in my life. I didn't have a physician in my life to look up to
Mhm.
at the time in particular, but I think I knew I wanted to help people in that way, in the way of science and in the way of healing.
Very impressive. And when did you figure out that you wanted to be a pediatric ER doctor?
Well, that's an interesting story. And this is a lesson for all. So, when I started medical school, I was, I'm a pretty stubborn human being, and I was pretty determined and pretty confident that I wanted to be an obstetric and gynecologist. I wanted to do women's health. I wanted to deliver babies for a living and take care of women during pregnancy. And so I kind of, interestingly enough, that was my last rotation in medical school. And third year of medical school is when we do our clinical rotations. And so I kind of didn't take the other specialties as seriously as I could have, because I knew that I was just going to rock it out in the end, and that's what I was going to be. And I didn't like it as much. I noticed when the baby came out, I was kind of disinterested with the rest of the process. Not to say that birthing is not a beautiful process and taking care of the woman, and but I found myself kind of looking over at the baby. Interestingly enough,
Mm.
but unfortunately, during my peds rotation, which was like around this time of the year, was like midway through my medical school clinical year, I kind of just poo-pooed it because I did a lot of outpatient pediatrics, and I did not appreciate looking in children's ears at all. And so I equated pediatrics to ear exams and looking for ear infections. And I was like, yeah, I'm not interested in that. Interestingly enough, I took a year off between third and fourth year medical school at Chicago to come to Baltimore to get a master's in public health. I knew I wanted to do public health, like I said, with the influence of my stepfather and having lived in Southern Africa during my high school years. It really had an impact on me. And it was then I met with a mentor who was doing adolescent medicine, so in the way of pediatrics, and said, "You know what? I do women's health all the time. I just don't deliver babies." And I really was intrigued by that. And I was really intrigued with working with older children. I did a lot of work in the city of Baltimore school district, especially in high schools, teaching about health, working on health initiatives such as asthma with the city health department. So that really got me going. And I came back my fourth year and said, you know what? just kidding. I want to be a pediatrician. I do not want to do OB-GYN. And so matched in pediatrics at Children's National in Washington, D.C.
I see. Great, great. Thanks for sharing that. Well, switching gears, if you'd like to explain to our listeners, what EMS is and why it is crucial to our healthcare system, and how is it beneficial for both pediatric and adult patients?
So emergency medical services, I think it's what the layperson understands as our 911 system. I think most people understand it as what it was, I should say, in this country, is you call the emergency number that we know to be 911. An ambulance shows up at your door. As soon as those EMS clinicians arrive at your door or in your house, they provide care. They provide the best care, and they provide care from your home or from the scene. It doesn't need to be your home, it could be an accident in the street or wherever you are, wherever you called and you're sick. They provide care all the way to the hospital. Now, it didn't used to be that way. EMS was started with Freedom House Ambulance, was actually started here in Pittsburgh, where I currently reside and work, off of the backs of 25 Black men and later women. And the innovative Dr. Peter Safar, or Safar, who is known as the father of CPR and the first chairman of anesthesiology here at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. Also, a brilliant guy by the name of Mr. Phil Halen, who was able to bring the grant money, and many, many, many others. They were the ones in the mid to late 60s that started to provide care once you called for care. Before then, if you were sick and you needed care, you were just thrown into either the back of a hearse or a paddy wagon or a police car and brought to the hospital. So let's say you were having a heart attack, nobody would take care of you on the way to the hospital. Lucky were you if you got to the hospital and the care that they provided saved your life. But in many instances, people died on the way to the hospital or by the time they got to the hospital. So EMS provides this very critical care, but that is a very narrow view of EMS. EMS is a whole systems approach. So EMS not only includes the 911 care, it includes public health, it includes disaster preparedness, it includes, making sure that you get to the right place at the right time. As far as destination care, it determines how you get the best care for certain types of time sensitive critical ailments, such as having a heart attack, such as having a stroke. That's all wired into our EMS system. There's also community based EMS, where EMS clinicians go out into homes like post COVID and check on people's oxygenation. They help take dialysis patients to dialysis, things of that nature. So it is a broad systems based care outside of the hospital. It connects home and scene to hospital in so many ways.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I think we tend to take the whole EMS 911 structure in this country for granted because, when you travel to other countries that are not developed, it's essentially, it doesn't exist. So I don't know if you've had experience with that personally, but I've been to countries and areas where, they just don't offer emergency medical services.
That is very true. And I think, looking back at, it wasn't until I recently began to kind of rehash my story over and over again that I kind of connected the dots. But my maternal grandmother, who was very dear to me, even to this day, I have her picture on my mantle. I talk to her all the time for whatever it's worth, was hit by a car in Ghana, the
Hmm.
central region of Ghana, on her way to a funeral, bringing food to a funeral. And there was no 911 system. She was left there to
Yeah.
die. And the thought of my beautiful grandmother laying on the street, maybe other cars running over her, or nobody being able to call for help, or there's this not being a system in place, just breaks my heart. And you're right. And so I have experienced that firsthand, where that would be unfathomable here
Right.
in this country today.
Right. As a ER pediatric doctor, what are the typical cases that like you treat on a regular basis?
So asthma is a big one. Asthma helps us to think about health in a holistic way. Because when you have a child coming into the emergency room or the emergency department with asthma, we're basically doing patchwork. We're putting on a band aid. What really ends up saving that kid is making sure they're in a dust free, clean, cockroach, mold free environment, making sure the air is clean when they go out and play. All of these things contribute to the morbidity and mortality of kids with asthma. And it seems like a very simple chronic illness, but it can become very deadly very quickly, especially for certain marginalized groups. African American children are 7 times more likely to die from an asthma attack than any other racial group. So it's a very real thing. Asthma we see quite a bit, especially in the fall and winter season, or even exercise induced. So those are some of the common things. But we see, as you can imagine, in the pediatric emergency department, a myriad of things from the very sick newborn that we're ruling out sepsis, to new onset diagnosis of cancer, to new onset of diabetes. Trauma is the number one epidemic in children, whether that is non-intentional trauma or non-accidental trauma in the way of abuse, or just trauma from riding an ATV, a bicycle, or getting hit by a car. So, there's a lot of things that we see on a regular
Yeah.
basis.
Yeah, that's quite extensive, I'm sure, for you. I totally agree with you, though. I think, seeing kids that are coming in with severe asthma attacks, it's probably one of the scariest things to take care of. But yeah, it's also very challenging. And like you said, it requires a huge team effort, regarding just post hospital care, like you said, with social worker and follow up and, making sure they're in the right environment. So,
Definitely.
and I know you've done some legislative work. Like what type of awareness have you raised when it comes to pediatric emergency care?
Yes, thanks for asking that question. So, I took advantage of the fact that I spent over a decade. I spent 12 years in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. And as I alluded to earlier, I did my pediatric residency in Washington, DC. So I used that opportunity to actually go to Capitol Hill and speak in offices such as Ted Kennedy's, Dick Durbin, Barbara Mikulski, Steny Hoyer, you name it, on various children's issues. But the one I think I'm most proud of, that I holistically approached in the way I worked on state legislation in Maryland and worked on federal legislation, is the School for Epinephrine Act. The School for Epinephrine Act allows for schools to have an EpiPen in the schools in case a student has an allergic reaction or a severe allergic reaction known as anaphylaxis. And anaphylaxis is deadly. It basically causes a reaction in the immune system that basically shuts down everything, causes a huge inflammation surge in the body, closes up your airways, your gut, everything, cardiovascular can kind of shut down in an instant. And so with this piece of legislation, before the legislation passed, parents had to go through the rigmarole of meeting with their primary care physician, getting approval there, going through the bureaucracy of paperwork, and then bringing the EpiPen themselves to the school. But then there were kids that were dying, kids who had simple peanut allergies, who, you know, you got shared a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, at lunch, and went into anaphylactic shock, and mom couldn't get the paperwork in time to get the EpiPen in.
Hmm.
And so we kind of got rid of the middleman by allowing every school to have EpiPens in the school in case these things happen. Because we know there are kids that have known allergic reactions, but there are other kids that we don't know of. And so that was signed into law by President Obama in 2013. So that was a really successful, I think, legislative advocacy work and initiative that I got to be a part of. Other things are like making sure that FAA kits, kits on airplanes, are ready for kids, or they have medicines in there that you can use for kids that have trouble or need medical assistance on the airplane. Those are just a couple of examples.
That's amazing. Great work. So I do have a question. So the kits on the airplanes, do they contain EpiPens?
They do complain. Sorry. So the kits on the airplanes do contain EpiPens, but every kit is slightly different per airline.
Hmm.
And as you can imagine, the more luxurious airlines and airlines that have potentially more money may have a more well robust kit. But the idea is to make sure that whatever the baseline kit is the same,
Hmm.
and it has the medications needed for both adults and children.
I see. Great work, Sylvia. Yeah, kudos to you for being part of that legislation. That is so important. I know
Thank
as an
you.
ER doctor, it can be very stressful. So, what are some of the challenges that you face as a pediatric ER doc?
I think what I alluded to before with the asthma of, I feel like a lot of what we do is band-aid work where we see some of the kids over and over and over again, where it is not enough just to get them over the hump when they are in life-threatening situations, but really trying to maximize how we can allow these kids to live daily healthy lives, right? There's something to the emergency room about that. That's why we're there, we're that safety net, but kind of try to be innovative and think outside of the box as how, as emergency medicine doctors, we can do more than that. And we can provide better education to our communities, better education to our colleagues, and better holistic care for our patients. Whether it's in the way of, pain management and sickle cell disease and recognizing that sickle cell pain is real pain, and that we need to take care of our sickle cell patients. Need to have a different mindset about opioid use disorder in our sickle cell patients, especially our young ones. We need to have a holistic mindset for our kids with asthma. We need to help new parents, with newborn care. We need to provide resources for, immigrant families or families who have special needs kids who, may have multiple technology use dependent devices such as a gastrointestinal tube or a ventricular peritoneal shunt, meaning, they have to have a shunt in their brain to move the fluid around so that the brain doesn't get swollen. You see these parents and you see these families, and they're just so overburdened. And you want to help them in more ways than you can. And just figuring out a way to kind of do that for them, I think is challenging.
Yes, I agree. Thanks for sharing that, Sylvia. Well, now on a lighter note, switching gears again, I've heard about your recent accolades being the medical advisor to the medical series called The Pitt. For those of you who haven't seen the show, can you explain to our listeners what it's about?
Yes. So the Pit is based on a busy emergency department in the city of Pittsburgh. And it basically captures hour by hour. Each episode is an hour of a shift, which that was created by R. Scott Gemmell, who's the showrunner of the Pit, which is innovative within itself, has never been done before in medical drama history, to really enhance the busyness, the critical care and acuity work that emergency medical providers do every day. And so it focuses purely on emergency medicine cases in the emergency department. And you do follow the characters, but within their work. And you get to see them grow within the work that they do, the intense work that they do within the emergency department.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great show. I've enjoyed watching it. Very realistic. Can you kind of take us back to how you like got involved? Can you take us back to the day when you got called for the position? What was that like?
Absolutely. So this was in March of 2024. So I have a very close friend of mine, Dr. Beth Hovman, who's at the University of Pittsburgh School of Public Health, who is one of the preeminent folks that does a lot of work in health media and seeing how we can learn about healthcare through media, basically. And she had a relationship with a nonprofit out in LA, specifically at the University of Southern California within the Norman Lear Center called Hollywood Health and Society. The goal of Hollywood Health and Society is to provide medically accurate information and expertise to all TV shows. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a medical drama. And Dr. Hoffman had done some research with them. Well, they had asked Dr. Hoffman if they knew of an ER doc in Pittsburgh who had an expertise in health disparities. And Dr. Hoffman, gracefully enough, said, I know just the person, Dr. Sylvia Owusu-Ansah. So she put me in touch with Hollywood Health and Society. They put me in touch with the writer's room of The Pit, which had not been approved yet as a pilot in March of 2024, not been approved.
Hmm.
And so over a Zoom call of 2 hours, I spent 2 hours telling various storylines, true and real storylines that I experienced in the pediatric emergency department with Dr. Joe Sachs. He's one of the executive producers and writers of The Pit. He's actually the medical advisor who, interestingly enough, went to film school and medical school, and is a beast when it comes to this art, and one of the former executive producers of ER. So a lot of these folks were a part of the ER crew. To be honest with you, I didn't watch ER to that degree. I remember Miss Dr. Green, I'm sorry, and the brain cancer story. But other than that, I was not a big Noah Wyle, Dr. Carter fan in that way. But segue back, they asked me questions as related to what are some of the healthcare disparities that you deal with in Pittsburgh? What is the demographic makeup of the community? What is the demographic makeup of the healthcare workers? Give us some storylines that you think are really important. And the one question that they asked all advisors, because there were numerous advisors outside of myself, numerous, is just why this show is so good and so accurate, because they actually listen to the medical community. One question that they asked was, if you were to do a show today, what story would you want us to tell that has not been told or needs to be highlighted? And so that gave me the opportunity to talk about one of my 17-year-old patients who came in who was in sickle cell pain crisis, who I didn't think was being managed properly as far as her pain. It wasn't understood how significant her pain was. I talked about the ingestion of THC gummies and the surge that we're seeing with all these kids having seizures and going to comas, having to go in the ICU because they got into mom's purse or somebody's cabinet and got into some THCs. I talked about the immigrant makeup of Pittsburgh, the Somali population, the Nepali population, the Hindi population, and the demographic makeup. And I highlighted that I'm the only Black physician in my pediatric emergency department, and it's a not uncommon thing. Only 5% of active physicians are Black. So I highlighted a lot of those things. They continued to ask me questions around those, and then anything else that I wanted to do. Interestingly enough, in April 2024, I got the celebratory call for them that, hey, we got accepted as a pilot, HBO Max, we're green lighted, right, as the term would be. In May of 2024, I had the opportunity to go out for a conference related to EMS, not surprisingly, as an expert. And I decided to take that time to thank the Hollywood Health and Society people for the opportunity just to be a part of that, whatever that was going to be, meaning a part of the pit and bringing me in. And they said, you know what? It's your lucky day. The writers are in the writer's room. We're going to take you over there. And so they took me over to John Wells Productions. And I walked in, and who was standing there but Noah Wyle.
Oh, wow.
And then I lost it. And then I was like, oh gosh, we're in Hollywood now. It's like everything hit now. You're seeing people, and he's like, hi, Dr. Sylvia. And I would literally tipped over, and he was like, it's okay. They had me sit at the head of the table of the writer's room. I have my own movie called In Good Hands, which portrays my work life as a Black physician. That's an 11-minute short that's in on American Black Film Festival run right now, and it's heading to LA. And they let me feature that in the room. And they asked me more questions about myself. They were like, just tell us all about yourself. Is there more to tell us? So that was like another couple of hours. And in that space, I talked a lot about the work that I do in CPR. I'm very passionate about teaching CPR. I taught all 500 athletes of Division I athletes at Pitt CPR, and the record-breaking goalie saved her dad's life 7 months after we taught her with CPR, inspired by Damar Hamlin. But so we've done a lot of CPR work. So talked about that, and that kind of segued into Freedom House. And I said, they asked me again, is there anything you want to talk about when it comes to Pittsburgh and healthcare? And I said, you cannot talk about Pittsburgh and healthcare if you do not talk about Freedom House Ambulance, because they are the beginning of EMS. And so hence one of the episodes that talked about Freedom House, and I gave them resources. And then talking about legislative work there, I'm working on the Congressional Gold Medal for Freedom House Ambulance currently. So anyway, so in May, I got a little bit more, and then just did my due diligence. I was really excited about the pit starting at the beginning of this year and wanted to put together a little premiere in Pittsburgh. So I actually reached out to HBO Max and see if they were willing to work with me to welcome the crew. And Noah happened to come in February of this year, and we were able to connect with the School of Public Health and my own hospital. And so the relationship just kind of continued from there. And then when they came back to film in Pittsburgh in September, we did kind of a red carpet ceremony for them at the Children's Hospital. So I'm happy to say I still have a relationship with the writers, executive producers, and the bigwigs of the pit. I'm not currently advising
Mhm.
anymore. I did not. I have a little input, I believe. I'll have to see for season two. I'm not actively advising, but the relationship is very much there, and very appreciative for the opportunity.
Very cool, Sylvia. That must have been amazing just sitting in that boardroom with the writers and Noah Wyle, huh?
It was incredible. I think it still hadn't hit me yet. The funny thing was, we turned around the corner, and I was hungry, I have to admit. And there was this beautiful, and it's California, right? So this beautiful avocado salad with like fresh vegetables, everything. And I'm staring at the salad, and Dr. Sachs and Mr. Wiley are singing my praises. They're like my hype to John Wells. And they're like, "Hi, here, this is John." And I just heard John. I'm like, "Oh," I'm like, "Hi, John." And I'm looking at the salad. I'm not thinking, but I'm like, somehow I feel like I shouldn't bother this guy. Went to take pictures. We walk out the door, and I look at the sign, John Wells Productions. And I'm like, my gosh, that was John Wells. I was like, it didn't hit me. I think the bigger effect for me was to watch the episodes and see these storylines that I shared unfold in real time. I think that was for me the biggest kind of bang for my buck. It was incredible to be in the room, and looking back, like the opportunity to be in the room is like mind boggling.
Yeah,
But to have people hear what you're saying, and put it on screen, to be one of the most respected medical dramas right now, probably in the history of medical dramas, is probably one of the biggest honors that I could ever imagine.
amazing. Yeah, I was a big fan of the show ER back in the early 2000s because I did my training at Cook County Hospital at that time. So I was a big fan of George Clooney and Noah Wyle, who came later on in the show, like you said, Dr. John Carter. So what's he like in person?
He is the most amazing human being you could meet. The antithesis of what you think of, like, arrogant celebrity. I mean, he was holding doors open for us, holding things for us. My youngest one could not come. I brought my oldest one to the hospital to do the red carpet ceremony to help me with like social media posting. My youngest one couldn't come, so we brought her stuffed animal, and like he took a picture with her stuffed animal, and said hi to her. He was chit chatting with my 17-year-old daughter. He's just a great human being, and he sat with the whole staff and asked, "What do you want to ask me?" And people were like, "You should do this and you should add this." And he's like, "Great idea. Great idea. We'll take that note." So human,
That's awesome.
just gracious, wonderful person.
That's terrific. Yeah. What's the one thing that you did not expect when working with the Pit, the TV series?
Well, I think, like I said earlier, one, I didn't expect that what I shared would actually be shared or documented, right? At least to the degree that it was. And that's all being said in a good way. And the accuracy of it, just like everybody else. I mean, it is, you have almost every single specialty trying to poke holes in this show, and people are having a hard time poking holes in this show. And I'm learning so much from the pit, because it's so medically accurate, and some of the more recent technology and some of the procedures that you do. Because again, I'm pediatric emergency medicine. This is like adult focused. And so
Right.
I think the accuracy and the realness, the time, the 1 hour per episode, all of it. But I think the biggest thing for me was like, they validated us as emergency medical providers, and they heard us. Hollywood heard
Hmm.
us with this. They hit the hammer on the nail with this. They heard us. They validated us with the pit.
Yeah, no, you could definitely tell that when watching the show, it's so accurate. So that's what I like about it as well. But amazing. So Sylvia, what are some of your interests outside the hospital and work? How do you like to decompress?
Yes, so I do take daily walks. I walk about 3 miles a day. So exercise, I guess, exercise is something you should be doing anyway, but some people say, things outside of exercise as hobbies. More recently with my breast cancer diagnosis, and, looking at, I'm reading more. I just didn't have the time before to read. Like I talked about before, I do have my own film, so I'm working on some projects in media, and I love working on creative projects and thinking those through. I love to dance, especially with my girls. We do karaoke. We like to dance. And I'm an introvert, so I'm good with like being in the room by myself with no noise. That doesn't bother me.
Mhm.
And not necessarily in the way of meditation, because I know meditation has specific rules to it and the way that you do it, but just kind of being with oneself. I'm a person of faith, and so tend to spend that time to pray and kind of reflect on next steps or where I've been or where I'm going.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Sylvia. You definitely need that. And what's the one thing that you'd like to highlight? I've never been to Pittsburgh. What's the one thing that you like to highlight of Pittsburgh for potential visitors?
Oh man, there's so many things to highlight. Coming from Boston, it's so similar. It is definitely a neighborhood town, and so you definitely have Bloomfield, which is like the Italian neighborhood. You actually have a place called Polish Hill. You have the historic Hill District from where EMS started, historically Black Hill District, where there was a Black Renaissance. You had people like Louis Armstrong come in, and it's on the hill, and you can see all of everything. You have the Strip District, which has your butcher shops and your delis and your all your Yinzer stuff. It's a big sports town, so you got black and gold is everywhere here. You'll be hard to press. This is one of the few cities, the only city that I know that you'll be hard pressed to find any other sports gear here for any other city, and they stay consistent. So the city colors are black and gold. Steelers, Penguins, Pirates. So I think that's pretty cool. I'm a big sports person, so it's cool in that way. The food is pretty good here. You have the signature Permanente sandwiches, which basically like deli sandwiches with French fries in them. You have your pizza standoffs of who likes what pizza parlor. And this is Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. So you have your trolleys here. And for those of us who are big fans or Daniel Tiger fans, there's a lot to Pittsburgh. You got three rivers that you have the Allegheny and the Mon that dump into the mighty Ohio, and so there's a lot to see and do here.
Yeah, sounds like a great city. I'll have to check it out. I do have to ask, are you a Steelers fan or a Patriots fan?
Oh, you're the only one who's like me out there. And yeah, I'm 100% Bostonian. So,
uh,
and they know that here.
yeah.
Nobody's really invited me to the parties or no, the Steelers have been great. I've done a lot of work with the Steelers. I have a middle school pathway program actually that I co-lead with one of the local schools, and the Steelers have been great in supporting that. When Najee was here, he came to the school. The Pirates have been great in supporting that. So I say that to say, but my number one team is the Celtics, and Pittsburgh does not have a basketball team. So I do go to Cleveland twice a year to see my Celtics. But yes, I am a Patriots fan through and through.
Hey, it's all good. It's all good. Well, before we wrap up, Sylvia, how can listeners get a hold of you with any questions?
Yeah, so I have my own landing page. It's drsylvia-o.com, drsylvia-o.com. So it talks about how it talks about how I advise for the Pitt. It talks about my own movie that's on the film festival circuit currently called In Good Hands. It talks about a lot of things we talked about here, my history, the things that I love to do, what I'm passionate about. I am on social media at least a few times a week. And so Instagram, I'm at MD Owusu, M as in Mary, D as in dog, O as in ostrich, W as in walrus, U as in umbrella, S as in Sigma, U as in umbrella at MD Owusu. I'm also on Facebook, and I'm also on TikTok at Dr. Sylvia underscore O. So there's very many ways that you can keep in touch with me or figure out what I'm doing next or
Yeah, I'll be sure
kind
to
of,
put your website on the show notes, and if you're with your permission, I can also include the LinkedIn.
yes. Hmm.
Great, great. Well, thank you so much, Sylvia, for your time and being a guest on MD Roundtable. Keep up doing the great work you do at the University of Pittsburgh, and if you have any future advising roles with the Pitt.
Yes, will do. Thank you for having me on.
My pleasure, Sylvia.
It's always a pleasure. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, and have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Folks, if you enjoyed that episode, don't forget to leave a review of MD Roundtable Podcast, and don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you want to reach out to me with any comments or questions, feel free to go ahead and email me at drtedthatchandcarey gmail.com. Once again, Dr. Ted Thatchencarry at gmail.com. I will also leave the email contact in my show notes. Thank you again for joining me. Have a great day.